this evening we shall discuss the characteristics of not self or anatta, based on the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on not self or no self. It's not easy to realize the characteristics of anatta. Most people could understand the characteristics of anicca, impermanence, the characteristics dukkha, suffering, or unsatisfactory. But it's not easy to realize the characteristics of anatta, not self or no self. Quite many understands the characteristics of anatta as beyond control. But this is only one of the aspects of the characteristics. And most people might understand this aspect of anatta beyond control through concepts. So sometimes meditators might think certain things are happening and beyond their controls. Then they think that they are experiencing or realizing anatta. So in this sutta, Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha explains that all these five aggregates, in other words, the mental and physical phenomena are not self. So as you know, the five aggregates of clinging are rupa khanda, the aggregate of materiality or physicality, vedana khanda, the aggregate of feelings or sensation, or sanya khanda, the aggregate of perceptions, sankara khanda, the aggregates of mental formations, and vijnana khanda, or the aggregate of consciousness. So in order to understand better the truth of anatta, we have to understand that those who do not realize the ultimate truth, you hold the idea or the notions of atta. In other words, there's a self, a soul, that's able to exercise controls. Some people take the atta as permanent, indestructible. This is because they have not yet realized the truth of conditionality. In other words, everything is arising due to conditions, and whatever is arising due to condition is not permanent, or it is subject to arising and passing away. It's because its impermanence, that's why it's not satisfactory, or dukkha. So we can understand the characteristics of anatta, as explained in this discourse, Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. It is explained as not being amenable to one's will. It is a characteristic of not self or no self. In other words, not complying to one's wish. So the sutta explained that it's not possible to say of form. Of form is rupa, the body. Let my body be task. Let my body not be task. Let my body be task, in other words, in the best of conditions. Let my body not be task, in the words, not in the worst of conditions. So as you know, it's not possible. The form of the body subject to decay, old age, sickness. So, in other words, because it's not amenable to one's will, then it tends to afflict. Afflict means cause pain and suffering. So in other words, afflictions is another characteristic of not self. So similarly, we cannot say of the feeling, let feeling be task, let feelings not be task. Let feeling be task means always experiencing present feelings. Not be task means not experiencing any unpleasant feelings. So it's because it's not complying to one's will. So that's why it tends to afflict. It causes pain and suffering. But it's not enough to understand these aspects of not self or no self. The sutta or the discourse explains further. So this discourse was given by the Buddha to the 5 ascetics. First, the Buddha explains to them the 4 noble truths. In the sutta, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and the 5 ascetics attain the first stage of enlightenment. And when Buddha explained to them Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, they attained the highest stage of enlightenment or arahantship. So the Buddha asked them, what do you think, bhikkhus? Is the form, rupa, permanent or impermanent? So the five ascetics had attained the first stage of enlightenment, so definitely they know the answer. The noble one, you never regards any form or rupa or the mind as permanent. The noble one understand well all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. So they answer impermanent. Then the Buddha asks further, that which is impermanent, is it painful or pleasant? So they answer painful, in the dukkha. That which is impermanent, painful, subject to change, can it rightly be regarded thus, or this is mine, or this I am, this myself? So the five ascetic answer no. So in the words, in order to realize anatta, one have to realize clearly the characteristics of anicca and dukkha. It's not possible to realize anatta without realizing anicca and dukkha. So sometimes some understand anatta as beyond control. This is merely understand through a concept. For example, there was an instance in one of the previous retreats in another place. A yogi who had been practicing very well and developing constant and continuous mindfulness and attaining deeper and deeper concentration. So the thinking mind or wandering minds is getting less and less. Very few thinking or wandering mind arising. But 2 or 3 days later, somehow the mind becomes more and more restless. In other words, there was a lot of thinking arising. The mind keeps on wandering. So he could not realize what's the reasons. And then someone explained to her that this is also an experience of anatta. So if this is the case, then we may not have to put so much effort to meditate. When the mind getting more restless during meditation, then one thinks that this is an experience of anatta. The mind becomes restless. Sometimes could be due to lack of effort, or sometimes the mindfulness getting weaker, or sometimes the mindfulness is not constant and continuous. So this is not an experience of anatta. So similarly, sometimes there's some misconception that when the form of the body or the form of the arms or the forms of the legs has disappeared, then some may think that this is an experience of anatta, in other words, seeing no form. But seeing no form is not an experience anatta. The Brahmas in the formless world do not have any form. They do not perceive any form, yet they are not yet enlightened. So meditators have to understand correctly in order to realize anatta. They also have to see the characteristics of anicca, dukkha clearly. They also have to see cause and effect clearly, or in other words, the conditions, see them, or see the arising and passing away of the phenomena as conditioned phenomena. Everything arising dependent on conditions. Hence, because it is arising dependent on condition, it's also subject to passing away. And when we want to realize suffering, the characteristics of dukkha, meditators also need to realize impermanence clearly. In brief, there are three kinds of dukkha. The first is known as dukkha, which is translated as ordinary suffering or intrinsic suffering. Birth is dukkha. If you have knowledge of the teaching of Four Noble Truth, in the first Noble Truth, the Buddha explained birth is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow is suffering, physical pain is suffering, mental grief is suffering. So this is known as dukkha. Everyone experiences dukkha. It's not difficult to understand dukkha. Then the second dukkha is known as viparinama dukkha, suffering produced by change. In other words, present feelings is not permanent, it's also subject to change. Even the experience in meditation also subject to change. For example, concentration meditators will be able to attain deeper concentration. They may enjoy breeze happiness when they have attained absorption concentration. But the breeze happiness arising due to absorption concentration subject to change. If concentration meditators clings to this experience of bliss or happiness, then suffering will arise. Similarly, mindfulness meditators may also experience viparinama dukkha. Sometimes they could develop constant and continuous mindfulness and attain deeper concentration. At that moment, there's very few thinking or wandering mind. But sometimes the effort is getting weaker, or meditators enjoying the calmness arising due to the concentration and effort getting weaker, then the mind could become restless again. Then there's a feeling of frustration. So this is also viparinama dukkha. Similarly, those who enjoy sensual pleasures, for example, listening to a certain song, do you think that a person will be able to enjoy listening to the same song, one and the same song, for the whole month or for the whole year? It's not possible. One could be enjoying listening to a popular song for 1 week or 2 weeks. Then one would be getting bored listening to the same song again. So one wishes or desires to listen to something new, and so on. So it's not difficult to understand dukkha and viparinama dukkha. But in the practice of mindfulness meditation, vipassana meditation, meditators need to realize sankhara dukkha. Sankhara dukkha is defined as the characteristics of suffering, which is constantly oppressed by instant arising and passing away of the conditioned phenomena. So it's not possible to realize sankhara dukkha by thinking or analyzing. We can only realize sankhara dukkha through the practice of mindfulness meditation, vipassana meditation. So if a mindfulness meditator aspires to realize sankhara dukkha, then one has to develop a constant and continuous mindfulness for longer and longer period of time. In other words, one has to develop moment-to-moment mindfulness. So when meditators is able to develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, then one also realizes the concentration is also lasts for a moment. It's because every phenomenon is arising and passing away very instantly. It's not possible to mindful and concentrate on one phenomenon more than a moment or more than a second. Then that experience of meditation also being carried forward from moment to moment. So in that way, meditators will realize sankhara dukkha eventually. So even though meditators experience, for example, physical pain or physical discomfort, as long as meditators have not yet realized the instant arising and passing away of the physical pain, meditators have not yet realized sankhara dukkha. Meditators are merely experiencing dukkha, the physical pain. So when meditators could realize sankhara dukkha, then meditators come to realize the first noble truth. The meditators will be able to experience anatta as well. So meditators have to realize the three common characteristics. So when meditators could realize every phenomenon is arising and passing away by itself. In other words, they realize them as a nature process. The meditators could not exercise any control over the arising of the phenomena, nor exercising any form of control over the passing away of the object of phenomenon. So that's why meditators can't choose the object or predict what phenomenon is going to arise in the next moment. Meditators can only be mindful whatever object is arising at that present moment. For example, when meditators are mindful of the rising movements during sitting meditation, when the process of rising movements has disappeared, meditators can't predict that in the next moment there will be another process of rising movements, or there will be a sensation arising. So meditators can't expect or predict what objects is going to arise in the next moment. So that's why meditators have to keep the mindfulness or the attention of the mind at the present moment. So meditators need to focus the attention at the present moment. If the mindfulness is not yet well developed, then meditators have to put forth effort to direct the mind to the most distinct object that's arising in the body, and be able to mindful and note whatever mental state arising as soon as possible. But when the mindfulness is getting stronger, meditators will realize that the mindfulness is going towards the object by itself, or sometimes the mindfulness is arising almost at the same moment with another object or phenomenon. So meditators sometimes need to follow the mind. Even sometimes the mind moves very quickly to another stronger object. The meditators have to follow the mind. If the mindfulness is easily distracted by less distinct object, then it shows that the mindfulness is not attentive and precise. For example, when meditators are mindful of rising movements during sitting meditation, although the movements is very clear, and then there's a slight pain arising, the mindfulness moves to that pain immediately, even though it's not clearer than the rising movements. So in this case, meditators might have to direct the mindfulness back to the rising movements, which is clearer than the painful sensation. But sometimes when meditators could develop moment-to-moment mindfulness and attain deeper and deeper concentration, the meditators will be able to pay full attention to one object or one phenomenon at each moment. In fact, mindfulness is defined as full attention, or paying full attention to one object or one phenomenon that's arising at that present moment. But when meditators have not yet attained deep concentration, they could not pay full attention to one object. In other words, as meditators are mindful of any object, for example, rising movements, but then the mind is still conscious of other objects. For example, warmth, or hearing some noise or sound. So meditators think that the mind is perceiving 2 or 3 phenomena at a time. But the mind can only perceive one object at each moment. So meditators have to keep the mindfulness with the strongest object which is arising in the body. So when they are able to develop the mindfulness so that the mindfulness is perceiving one object at each moment. Then meditators will realize that the mindfulness is a rapid process, arising and passing away very instantly with the object. So when meditators, at that time, when meditators are mindful, for example, rising movements, mindfulness is only perceived as rising movements. The mind is not conscious of other things or other phenomena. If the rising movements had disappeared, in the next moment there's a pain, then mindfulness is only perceiving there's a pain only. The mind is not conscious of other objects or phenomena. And when the pain disappears instantly, then in the next moment, if the rising movement is clear, the mindfulness appear there, knowing there's a process of rising movements. So in the words, when meditators could realize the instant arising and passing away of the phenomena, then eventually they will come to realize sankhara dukkha. When they're able to realize sankhara dukkha, they will be able to realize the characteristics of anatta. So realization of anatta is not about seeing no form or something beyond control. What's meant by beyond control here is that everything is arising due to a condition. When the conditions are met, then the phenomenon will be arising. You can't prevent it from arising. For example, when there's a sound or voice, then consciousness will be arising, sensing or perceiving the sound. Sound is the main factors. Actually, when something is arising, it's not due to a condition or cause. It's usually due to a combinations of conditions or causes. When there's a sound, then there must be a space for the sound to travel to the ear. So there's a contact. And there's ear sensitivity. So when these conditions are met, that's why there's a cause for the arising of the consciousness. The consciousness perceiving the sound. So this consciousness is known as hearing consciousness. So when there's a arising of this hearing consciousness, this consciousness of hearing is being conditioned by other conditions. Then this hearing consciousness can condition the arising of awareness. Mindfulness, perceiving the arising of the consciousness. So when the mindfulness is getting clearer, sharper, meditators will realize the arising of the mindfulness is dependent on the object. meditators can't exercise any form of controls over the arising of the mindfulness. When the object has passed away, mindfulness that noted that object will pass away too. Meditators can't prevent the passing away of that process of mindfulness. So meditators come to realize every process, the object could be arising movements, pain, and the other is a noting mind or mindfulness, nature processes. But if meditators have not yet attained deep concentration, then they could not see them clearly as a nature process. So meditators need to put forth effort to train the mindfulness or to cultivate the mindfulness. So sometimes meditators have to learn from their experience. For example, whether or not they put enough effort to mindful and note the objects, or they have to strong desire to concentrate the mind, the mindfulness on the object. The mindfulness is sticking or attached to the object so strongly, it could not be mindful and note the mental states immediately. Also, sometimes meditators need to arouse the mindfulness so that the mindfulness is active. Sometimes the meditators need to put forth effort so that the mindfulness could stay with the object from the beginning to the end. For example, when meditators are mindful of the lifting movements or pushing movements during the walking meditation, if meditators did not put enough effort to keep the mindfulness with the movements, then sometimes the mindfulness is easily distracted by a certain sense object, for example the sound or the noise of the environments. So in this case, meditators have to put forth effort so that they could realize the three common characteristics of mental and physical phenomena. So when meditators are realizing the three common characteristics of mental and physical phenomena at that time, they are also realizing the specific characteristics or the individual characteristics of the mental and physical phenomena at the same moment. So meditators have to realize that anatta is not only about beyond control. We cannot realize anatta through concept. We can only realize anatta by seeing them as paramattha dhamma, or ultimate realities. So we can only realize ultimate realities when we have developed constant and continuous mindfulness and attain deeper concentration. So only when meditators could realize the true natures of mental and physical phenomena clearer and clearer, and for a longer and longer period of time, then they would make more and more progress in the mindfulness meditation, or inside knowledge.